by introducing them to you. I'm pleased to welcome former Ambassador Arun Kumar Singh. Thank you, sir, for your time. Welcome to Sansad TV. And we also have with us Professor Swaran Singh, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor, glad to have you with us on this edition of Perspective. Let me, in fact, pose the first question to you, Professor. What we are seeing today is Quad having an expansive agenda, including connectivity, energy security, maritime security, also share technology with countries in the global south. What's interesting is that a group that began as a coordination mechanism back in 2004 to respond to the humanitarian crisis in the aftermath of the tsunami, 20 years later, when we talk about it, it reflects its agenda having grown many-fold. How do you trace back this journey of the Quad from being just a coordination mechanism to today being one of the most significant global forums?
Thank you, Tina, for having me on your program. I think if you look at the 24-paragraph joint statement issued yesterday in Tokyo, it shows how deeply engaged all these four countries have come to be. Almost any issue that one can think of is today on their agenda. They have by now about 16 working groups, and as you mentioned, Quad has become a very integral part of foreign policies of all these four countries. Now, obviously, how has this come about? You mentioned about their response to the tsunami of 2004 when they first came together. Okay. Then, of course, it appeared that Beijing was not happy with this kind of formation happening. And, of course, at that time, these nations had slightly different leaders at home. And finally, in 2017, it was revived, and it has since then gone really full speed ahead, starting annual summit meetings, which even happened online when pandemic did not allow them to meet face-to-face. So in that sense, today there are even concerns that Quad perhaps should focus much more on consolidation rather than constant expansion of all possible areas that they can come about. What keeps them together are two things very quickly. One, all of them share China challenge, which is not often articulated as the reason of their coming together. But China's unprecedented rise and the way China has behaved, particularly South China Sea, which was mentioned not directly by naming China in the joint statement, was mentioned in terms of all countries have to ensure respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity, follow rule of law, and so on. Second was the whole creation of ASEAN at the center stage of this entire big region. And since late 1990s, ASEAN came to be very friendly to China. In fact, despite all the problems in South China Sea, ASEAN has not stood up together collectively in standing against China in terms of their claims in South China Sea. So since ASEAN was perhaps found no longer a very potent instrument of dealing with this China challenge, all the major stakeholders, Australia, Japan, United States, and of course India was invited to come into it, have come together to really ensure, as was being repeatedly mentioned in Tokyo, as they being the only grouping that can ensure free and open Indo-Pacific. Right. But at the same time, they all continuously keep saying that ASEAN must be the center stage platform. But we clearly understand that now the onus and the focus and gravitas of maintaining regional stability has moved to Quad. And because Quad is so strongly embedded in these four countries' foreign policy, it ensures that it will be a potent instrument, which is partly also visible by the interest that several other nations have shown to join. And therefore, the conversations about Quad Plus have also been there. So fundamentally, I think you are right in saying that this is one platform which has shown enormous bonhomie and potency, and I think will play a major role in defining the regional geopolitics.
Okay. And whether there's overlapping of shared interests as far as these groupings are concerned in the Indo-Pacific region. But before that, Professor, one thing that we would like to understand from you, we've been talking about the growth of Quad and the expansive agenda over the years. Ambassador mentioned that how the rise has been far from smooth. There have been several factors that he spoke about, and each of the countries, to begin with, worked or had different approaches, even though they were part of the same group. Can we now say that a lot of factors have contributed towards convergence on all of these issues, and that the keen interest at the top leadership level has also led to the enhancement of Quad's growth?
I think over the years, one can notice increased cohesion and better understanding of all four countries and their leaders at different levels. And there are reasons for it. Obviously, President Trump's period, and especially Mike Pompeo's speeches, were far more sort of strong and I dare say even anti-Chinese. And other three, particularly India, was not very comfortable in towing that line. Mm-hmm. And that is how sometimes we had a situation of course, lately, President Biden's fundamental approach to China has remained the same, but the way it is operationalized, the way it is communicated has slightly become nuanced and soft. So that is something which has made quite far more cohesive. I remember Mike Pompeo invariably used to say we need to distinguish between the party which is ruling China and the Chinese people. That language is no longer there from any of the Quad partners anymore. India, on the other hand, which is the only Quad member which is not an alliance partner, otherwise Australia and Japan are alliance partners of the United States, was understood to be most reluctant, and the Prime Minister had openly said in Shangri-La Dialogue speech of 2018 that India would not like to see this region militarized, that we would like to see region continuing to be inclusive. And at that stage, initially, India had in fact opened this issue of debating Indo-Pacific geopolitics with China in our annual maritime dialogue. And India believed that both China and Russia should be equally as much stakeholders in the Indo-Pacific region, and it should not just be restricted to Quad. That also has changed because of the border tensions since 2020 in that sense. So India has also moved slightly more closer to the central gravitation point of the Quad, which is fundamentally trying to ensure that China is not able to push through its way, undermining the norms, the rule of law, etc., which ASEAN has not been able to stand up to, and therefore Quad needs to stand up and deal with that. And as far as AUKUS is concerned, I think that is a very clear signal that when India was determined in not letting Quad become an Asian NATO, United States had to think of an alternative platform, which is where AUKUS was created. And now, obviously, there is no conversation about Quad becoming an Asian NATO anymore. So I think there are various reasons, and of course, leadership in Australia, experience of Australia with Chinese wolf warrior diplomacy. There are various reasons why these four nations over the years have become a little more cohesive, and I think that explains their confidence in expanding their agenda to almost any item that one can imagine is now today on their agenda in that sense. That's why the Foreign Minister of India in Tokyo said we have 16 working groups and more may be on the way to come. So I think it's a very sign of success of any platform to be able to grow as fast as that. And it's not only simple expression of intent. One can list out a whole lot of things that have actually happened on the ground.
You're right. And in that context, the external affairs. The ambassador spoke about this strong interactive dynamic between the Quad and our respective bilateral and trilateral relationship with the member countries. What have been some of the important ramifications of the rise and emergence of the emergence and rise of Quad on global geopolitics? Also, our bilateral relationship with countries like Russia, which also is a time-tested partner.
I think our relationship with Russia was initially a matter of concern, particularly at the beginning of Ukraine war. But India has withstood, and I think by now Western nations have kind of reconciled to the fact that India will continue to engage Russia the way it has. But it is also important to underline how India's language vis-a-vis Russia, as far as Ukraine crisis is concerned, has enormously changed. We, if you remember, began in February 2 years ago by saying we are concerned or we regret. Of course, when Boka massacre happened, India strongly said in August of that year that India wants to have an international investigation done as to what happened there. Then in September of 2021, Indian Prime Minister said this era is not era of war. May last year in Hiroshima summit, Indian Prime Minister said all nations must not voluntarily change any national boundaries. And now in his Moscow visit again, he said that no peace talks can be either conceived of or fruitful during bombing happening around. And bombing was happening near Kiev at that time. So India's language has formed up very clearly. And the way the paragraph on Ukraine is designed in this joint statement yesterday in Tokyo, again is a reflection of India's approach to Ukraine issue being very, very firm and dynamic. So it's not a static neutrality of India, it's been very dynamic, growing and changing, and I think West also appreciates over a period of time. But what is interesting to see how these four have also begun to come together and work together. Most recent example is Papua New Guinea in May this year. Just 2 months back, when there was a huge tragic landslide there, these nations immediately stood up and I think have already sanctioned more than $5 million together for relief there. But most important example, of course, is their what is today called Quad naval exercises. India has been doing naval exercises in the United States from 92 onwards, Malabar exercises. Over a period of time in 2007, Japan had joined it. For a few years it missed it, then again joined it. India, for some reason, had been very reluctant to allow Australia to join it, but now Australia also is part of what is now called the Quad naval exercises. That leaves, I think, an enormous impression on countries in the region, including China, as to how strong the mutual trust and understanding. We usually say if armed forces of countries begin to work together, that is a reflection of very strong trust between them. Otherwise, you usually begin with academics, journalists, or other people meeting each other in, track 2, track 3, track 1.5. But when militaries begin to work together, and the focus very clearly is on HABR operations, and of course, particularly on domain awareness,
Right.
which again is part of the whole paragraph is mentioned here. So I think there are a series of lists of activities that are showcasing that the agenda has not just expanded, but also delivered on the ground, one after another examples of that.
Okay, Ambassador. So while there has been a